Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Hey, Engagers, welcome back. And today we are with Bob. But Bob, before we kick off, are you prepared to engage?
I am ready.
Let's do this because we have Bob DePasquale. How's that pronounced?
DePasquale.
DePasquale, there you go. He is an advocate of stewardship, and he has always believed in taking care of the things that he has been blessed with. It is his mission to help others do the same, and his perspectives derive from a battle with cancer at age 18, so young. After growing up an only child, it wasn't until he was legally an adult that he felt alone. Having his life threatened at such a young age led to a unique view of the gift that is vitality. And there are some interesting topics that are not directly on the intro, but I don't know if you want to dive into that very quickly. Is there anything else that we're missing from that intro, Bob?
I think the intro is great. I appreciate it. I really do truly believe that we all have gifts and talents that we can make the world a better place, whether it's for 1 million people or 9 billion people or just one, but we can all make the world better for somebody.
Yes, we can. Let's do this. So, Bob, before we dive into sort of the deep questions, we also, and this is kind of deep as well in a way, we want to know what your day-to-day looks like, what your week-to-week looks like. Like if we were to experience your life, what would that be? What would that look like?
I think you'd be a little dizzy, a little crazed, somewhat entertained, hopefully refreshed a little bit. My day-to-day in life honestly has changed in the past couple months drastically since my business partner and I recently started a business. And nowadays, it's much more free and creative than it used to be. I spent many years, about 12 years, working for a previous employer, had a great time, but much of my days then were getting up early, going over to the office, which wasn't too far away, and leading a team of people in the financial planning space. And now, owning our own firm and being more in charge of marketing and kind of being an ambassador, I spent much of my time at home these days. Recording videos, recording podcasts, being an advocate of our organization, and ultimately stewardship, as you mentioned in the intro.
When you say stewardship, what do you mean by that?
Stewardship to me means taking care of the things that you have well. And whether it's physical, tangible things like money or possessions or your home, or it could be intellectual skills and property and things that you excel at. Whether it could be singing, it could be academics, it could be a specific industry that you work in, it could be working on games, it could be technical skills, artificial intelligence, anything that you have, taking care of it well. That is stewardship.
Sounds great. So kicking off with that and talking about stewardship, we actually want to go to a time where, you were trying to do something hopefully related to games and, things didn't go well. You can call it a first attempt at learning or a fail moment. We want to sort of be there with you. We want to learn those lessons, again, especially for our audience, the engagers. If it has anything to do with games, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Sure. Well, let me just start as a very young person. Video games were a big portion of my life. I was an only child. So
I've been there.
I needed entertainment one way or another. Now, I love playing sports and getting outside, and I still love to exercise and play sports outside, get some fresh air. But many of my younger years, I spent quite a bit of time playing games, and I always felt they were more engaging than watching television or going to the movies. In fact, I don't even like going to the movies. I think most of my friends, when I was growing up, they thought I was crazy. But there's a lot of movies that I haven't seen, not because I don't support that industry. I just never really found it entertaining. I'd much rather tell my own story in a good role-playing game. So my early stages of life were, I don't want to say formed, but definitely inspired a lot by that creativity there. And then it kind of got blocked out for many years in my profession. And I think I'm starting to be able to express that a little bit more recently. But I'll give you a story about how games specifically helped me in a time where I probably didn't even realize that they were, and how important that interaction and engagement and creativity was. When I was 18, and you mentioned it in the introduction, I had gone up to college. Now I live in South Florida here in the United States, and my family moved down here when I was very young. I was about 3 years old. They moved down from New York, and all the rest of the family stayed in New York. We were kind of like the black sheep of the family. So I grew up as an only child, and I didn't really have any cousins or anyone around. So, I mean, I don't want to say it was lonely. I had plenty of friends, but that was my experience. Well, I had an opportunity to go back to New York, to Hofstra University, which is on Long Island, not too far from New York City there, and spent some time with my family. I had an opportunity to play football up there. It was just a great time in life. I don't know if you remember when you're 18, Rob, but you feel invincible, right? I mean, you feel like what could possibly go wrong in your life at that point? Well, long story short, I was having some problems during training camp before my freshman year of college. I thought I had pulled a groin muscle. Now, if you've ever pulled your groin muscle, I don't think you realize how much you use that muscle just walking around and standing up. It's one of the most debilitating and painful things, but it shouldn't last that long. It should heal up eventually. Well, I was doing these training exercises, these rehab exercises to try to fix what was going on. And I picture a 3-wheeled stool. And what I had to do was I had to shimmy across this huge training room. Now, a college training room is way different than a high school training room. There's hundreds of people. I mean, it just at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, it's just a complete madhouse with people trying to get treatment and get ready for practice. And I'm dodging people without using my hands. I can only use my legs to get across the room while I'm on this stool. And it was so challenging. And at one point, the head trainer stands up in the middle of the training room. And for some reason, I don't know why, it got dead silent all of a sudden. And with all that commotion going on, and they called me Bobby at the time, and he was like, "Bobby, why are you still in here? You need to be back practicing on the field." And you know, when the head trainer calls you out for being a weakling, when you think you're this invincible 18-year-old, it's kind of a shot to your ego, right? Well, anyway, he ended up having a more private meeting with me, and we figured out that I needed to go to the doctor. So I go to the doctor, and I had a series of tests. My parents were coming up to support me for my first ever college game. Now, they knew at this point that this was not going to be that I wasn't going to be playing. But that was a Thursday. I come out of this appointment with my doctor, and my mom calls me from the car on the way to her brother's house, which is where we were going to meet, my uncle. And I had to tell her what happened in the meeting. And she was like, "Well, how'd the meeting with your doctor go?" And I was like, "Mom, he told me that I have cancer." And it was like the most overwhelming experience to have to tell my mom that over the phone. And I could hear my dad in the background, "Susan, what's going on? What's going on?" Like he could tell, like he knew something was up, right? And you could just feel it over the phone.
Yeah.
So we met back at my uncle's house, and we shed some tears, and we're just really confused, didn't know what to think. And that was a Thursday. The next couple of days were just a blur, to be honest with you, doing some more tests and speaking with the oncologist. And my oncologist had told me, you need to you can't drop out of all your classes. You have to continue to take some college classes, even though we have some pretty serious treatments that you're going to have to go through here. Well, that Saturday, my uncle's best friend came over to my uncle's house, and he handed my parents his keys to his car. We never met the guy before. Remember, we live down in Florida, so his best friend we never saw. We never even knew who he was. His name was Tim, though, and he's like, "Here, Bob, Susan, I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now. Take my car, to get you wherever you need to go over the next week or so to be able to get all the treatments or doctor's appointments that you need to go to." And then he left. He was only there for like 15 minutes. On Monday, I went to my first college class, and it was pretty smooth. The rest of the day we spent driving around in Tim's car, going to 3 or 4 other doctor's appointments that we had to go to. And then Tuesday morning, I get up, I go to my second college class, and I come out of this class, and I went to the cafeteria to grab something to eat. And I'm sitting there, and I don't know if you remember, Rob, do you remember those tube televisions? Not a flat screen like they have now, but there was one hanging, like a small one hanging at the ceiling in the corner in the cafeteria space that I was in. And the news was on, and I'm like squinting to see it. It was in the corner of the ceiling. but I could see what was going on. And a plane hit the Twin Towers in New York City while I was watching this. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. My dad calls me and says, hey, did you see what just happened? And I was like, yeah, that's pretty sad. And then all of a sudden, bam, another plane hit the other Twin Tower. And I was thinking, something's not right here. My dad said, you better come back to your uncle's house here. This is something's going on. So I hopped in the car. Oh, yeah. I hopped in the car, and it took me 9 hours to make what was typically a 15-minute drive from school to my uncle's house. And I'm in New York, so I'm actually watching this in the distance while I'm driving. And the traffic is nuts. And I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism, Rob. I will never listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again. I mean, I'm trained in the art, and that was the most riveting 9 hours of AM radio you can ever listen to. But it was just overwhelming. And I actually ran out of gas in my uncle's neighborhood. And we pushed the car into the driveway there, and we couldn't get a hold of my uncle, actually. My aunt was panicking. Finally, maybe 5:30 in the evening, he calls, and we confirmed that he was okay. He was actually on business in Denver the night before, was supposed to fly back to New York, and obviously couldn't. But we did find out that Tim, his best friend that gave us the car, was in the towers that morning.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and he died, and it was top of the world 4 days ago, whatever, a few days back. And then all of a sudden my world was turning upside down. And so needless to say, that was a very, very challenging time. And I'm telling you this story because I had to go through some pretty sharp treatments and surgery considering what was going on with me. And I found out, well, it took me probably 2 years to really get over the post-traumatic stress, if you will. The treatments lasted for the rest of that year, so 4 or 5 months there. And I was okay physically, thank God, and I'm okay today. But mentally, it was quite a drain on me. And on my podcast about 4 or 5 months ago, I had my cousin on who suffers from cystic fibrosis, which is a respiratory, immune, and lung breathing disorder. It's a very, very, well, it's not as rare as it maybe as it used to be, but it was really a death sentence for a child, but now modern medicine is amazing. However, he's about, I don't know, maybe 10, not quite 10 years younger than me. And when I went up to New York during that period of time, he was like in elementary school or maybe middle school, and I was getting ready for college. And so I didn't know him very well, but I loved my family. And we spent a lot of time together. And on our podcast, we did some reminiscing. And it occurred to me how important my time was with my cousin back then to get me through the mental drain and emotions that are being a cancer patient at that age and kind of having my world turn upside down. And so we were reminiscing on the show, actually, believe it, recording this on the podcast. And he told me, and I didn't know this, but he told me that our parents, so my mom and dad my mom and his dad are siblings. And he used to wake me up at like 6 a.m, the night, like the day after I had cancer chemotherapy treatments. And I'd be like, come on, man, why are you waking me up so early in the morning? And on the podcast, he was explaining to me about how this behavior was actually encouraged by our parents because he was suffering from cystic fibrosis. I mean, doing these incredibly challenging breathing treatments and taking all these drugs and having digestive issues. And I was going through cancer treatment, and they encouraged us to spend time together because mentally it was really a drag. And it took me years to realize that I didn't just power through cancer. I mean, I was determined to be the best cancer patient I could possibly be. I mean, my doctor told me exactly when to drink and eat, how many calories to have, the type of calories, how many ounces of water to drink. And those things were important, but there were other forces there. And one of them was being able to kind of wallow in our sorrows together with my cousin. And one of our favorite things to do, as you can imagine, was play video games together. And we spent many, many hours playing games together and just mindlessly taking our minds off of the physical struggles that we were going through. And it was such a powerful force. We can remember vividly. It's amazing how vivid the memories are of specific moments that we had up in their little loft playing these games. And I mean, if it wasn't for Halo, I think I probably wouldn't be here. I mean, it was such an important part of my life. And looking back, my cousin and I, we were bonded. I mean, he was the best man in my wedding. I'm actually officiating his wedding here in about a week. It's coming up really soon here. And it's just amazing that he's still alive. I'm alive. He's getting married. And we point a lot of it back to that 4 or 5 month period where we spent so much time together. It's really amazing.
That sounds fantastic. And we talked in the pre-interview chat and before we got to meet as well, that this has had definitely an influence in the way that you see things and perceive things in the world. How has your understanding of, sickness and all these things changed thanks to games?
First of all, sickness is something that cannot be measured. And what I mean by that is that I have other friends and family who have suffered, passed on from diseases, including cancer. I have quite a long list of people that I keep in my thoughts and prayers all the time for their illnesses and struggles. And there was a period of time there where it was very, very hard for me to understand why I survived and other people haven't, or other people have struggled more than I have. And it's very, very important that you can't try to compare and measure your illness. And when it comes to the games, it was so important that we had engagement and could express our creativity and spend time together that kept our mind off of specifically talking about my treatments versus my cousin's treatments versus who is suffering versus his friends who have passed on from the same disease that he has. Some people will say the words distraction, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Rob, but I don't think games are a distraction. I think that games are actually a form of edification because the human mind desires to be creative, and there's nothing more freeing and empowering than creativity. So if you're going through a really, really tough time, I didn't realize this. I didn't think about this until 4 or 5 months ago when I had this interview with my cousin on my podcast. But when you're going through a really tough time, it's almost, I think, one of the best things you could possibly do in the world is be involved in some kind of game that stimulates your mind to be creative, where you're involved in it. You're not just watching a video on your phone. You're not just watching Netflix. You're actually engaged in the process. There's mental recall that has to happen. It's reactionary. All of those things are very, very, very healthy for the brain. I truly believe that.
Yeah, there's for sure. And just two things that came to my mind. One is a past guest, Nirael. He talks about distraction in his new book and so on. And he says, well, if you're distracted, so the word distracted is because you're being distracted from something, right? So you should be doing something and you're not doing it because you're doing this distraction, whatever that looks like. So he calls the opposite traction. So what you want to do, what you should be doing, that is traction. If you're not, it's distraction. If you don't know what you're doing, you can't be distracted from that because you don't know what that is. So he kind of goes around the organizational aspects and time boxing and all these things. So that was the first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned distraction, which I think is pretty interesting when thinking about games. But then it's the whole resilience, and Jane McGonigal talks a lot about this, and she is a game designer herself, and she talks about many of these things in her book Super Better, where she recuperated from some very serious issues that she had through sort of in which a game that she designed for herself and to get her through these things was, one of the main things that helped her get out of it. And I also remember, now that we're talking about this, a conference in gamification Europe in which there was this parent whose son, or not, actually it was his daughter, I think, not sure now. They were talking about how they designed a system around, doing the exercises for cystic fibrosis. So I when you said it, great that you explained it very, very well on your intervention. But it was about, engaging the child to do these, because one of the exercises themselves are tough, I understand, but not only are they tough, they're tough to convince a kid to do them, which is the most important part, to do them regularly. So he engaged his child designing these games to get her through, doing all these things that she had and has to do, because I'm completely non-medical understanding here. But apparently this is something you have to do basically for the rest of your life, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So that those were some of the things that came to my mind. And about being a distraction or not, I don't know, unless you take, literally the concept that was mentioning before from Nirayal. Distraction is not necessarily even a bad thing. It is something that can be engaging, as you were saying, engaging in games and taking your mind away from other things that could be going through your mind. I do think that there are many things that happen, and it is, at least in my opinion, it is a lot better, even as a distraction, as bad as that can sound for some people, a lot better than watching TV, because it is active. You're actually engaging with something. You perhaps are being creative, depending on the game, of course. You are being creative. You're doing things. You're interacting maybe with other people, so you're being social as well. There's all sorts of things going on within a game that we could highlight in that sense.
Absolutely. And today's games are so interactive. I mean, it's amazing how you can communicate with people across the world. I remember when I was in college, after I was treated and healed, and at the time we didn't know what to expect in the long term. Obviously, now it's been almost 20 years, but at the time I was in college, I was back in school, I was healthy as much as we thought I was, and back to it. And we would still play games in college. And I remember we figured out how to link our Xboxes to the internet. This is before Xbox Live and all those things that you can use now. And we would be able to play games with people across the world.
A PC, basically, a very advanced and very focused PC, but it was an actual PC, right?
Right. And we connected it. I can't remember the name of the service, but we connected it to the internet through the router in our computer, and we're able to link Xboxes with people across the world. It was just amazing. And now, today you probably don't think that it doesn't seem that exciting or special, but it really was back then. So, but really making, the gamification of other things in our world right now is happening. It's important. I think you talked about having to gamify some of the treatments so that young people will actually do them. It's so true. I mean, there were things that we had to do that my aunt and uncle had to do for my cousin. And, now he's a man and he probably doesn't have to gamify it as much. But when he was younger, he certainly had to make it something that, and I think there's two important points about it that you mentioned. One is that you have to get them to do it because it's good for their health, or otherwise they won't survive. And number two, it's also a learning experience. And he'd learned how to take care of himself over all those years doing the treatments and participating in the processes that his parents and the doctors created for him to be successful. So it was really important for him too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So many things going on in the world. And Bob, you mentioned as well that this has influenced your professional practice. So outside of your personal life, can you give us a quick overview of what that looks like at this point for you?
Yes. I work in the financial services industry. It's a very broad industry. There's a million different titles that someone can have. Just without getting into my entire career of explanation of different titles and roles, right now, my business partner and I own a virtual family office firm where we provide modern financial management for purpose-driven families. And so we've learned over the years of how people think and make decisions around their finances. And what I've determined, and it's not just me, I don't want to make it seem like I'm some pioneer in this area, but what I've noticed and read about and researched is that money is the most emotional thing outside of maybe love in the world. And people are very, very emotional about their currencies, and rightfully so. It's such an important part of our world. And part of our job and our role now is to help people make wise decisions about anything that affects their lifestyle and their finances and help people navigate that road. So we're always looking for things that will help them not take the emotion out of it, because I think that's another cliche term where people say, oh, just take the emotion out of it. You can't do that. You can't take the emotion out of something that it's inherently in. So what we try to do is help them use their emotions for positive reasons in their financial lives. And so you asked about how it's affecting us. Well, the gamification of some of the areas of finance nowadays has a very, very big effect on how people make decisions and ultimately the services that we provide. So as an example, one of the most exciting parts of finance that I think some people believe that it's the only part of finance when it's not. It's just one of many, but is investing. Investing is a hot topic, especially now cryptocurrency and different types of alternative investments have become extremely popular. And so I use that example because I think most people are familiar, at least can understand what investing is. And there's lots of applications that now allow you to access to services and things that were not available years ago without going through a broker or a gatekeeper, someone who had to provide the service for you. And these applications, a good example is Robinhood. Another example is E-Trade has done services like this, and they're great. They're providing a tremendous service. At the same time, they've gamified some of the processes of investing. And so what happens is people feel rewarded for things that the applications determine as a prize within the game. And in some cases, it's very, very valuable. But in other cases, it may not apply for that person, but because they're playing the game, they continue to make important decisions based on the game, which can lead to trouble for some people and financial stress that they just don't need. So if we've made these platforms so easily available to people and they're encouraged to do things that take a little bit more time to become an expert in, or not even become an expert, to research, but it's super easy to click a couple buttons and you can place a futures bet, essentially, if you will, on a stock or a bond or something like that. It may not be to try to win the game. It could cause some problems. So I'm not here to bash those type of applications, but it's definitely affecting how we have our processes, because it's gamified and people are being made to believe that this is the game that everyone should be playing when it's not for everyone.
Interesting. And there comes, all the ethical considerations. There's even for you or for other engagers who might be listening, we have a couple of episodes on the ethical side of gamification. I'd really recommend you to take a look at that if this topic is something that seems to be interesting you after this intro by Bob. And Bob, we're kind of reaching the end of the interview, but I want to know a couple of recommendations from you. One, you've heard a bit of what we're into. You've seen the effect of gamification. Is there maybe a book or actually both, a book or somebody you would like to listen to, talking about these topics on the podcast, or a book you would recommend the engagers, or both?
Sure. The first book that comes to mind is not directly related to gamification, but it's a psychological book related to finance. And I think some of the things that we're talking about are touched on there in the book. And that's called The Psychology of Money by an author by the name of Morgan Housel. So you can check out The Psychology of Money. That's probably my favorite book related to what I was just talking about. Cool. Another book that is pretty popular out there these days related to habits that I think relates a lot to this subject, because if you can have positive habits around anything that you do, whether it is games or it's your health or finances, anything like that, I think it can really help you be successful. So I would recommend Atomic Habits by James Clear. That's another good one. And then ultimately, if you're really looking for a deep dive, I'm working on a book myself to publish in December that talks all about the psychology and how technology affects how we make money decisions. And gamification is certainly a topic in the text there. So those will all be good resources, places to go.
Sounds great. And in that sense, talking about gamification, what would you say is there something that you feel you're very good at when you're thinking of, maybe finances through gamification, or maybe games in this whole world of finance? Is there something that you say, well, this is sort of my superpower, my sweet spot?
Sure. What we do best at Initiate Impact, our company, is we help people identify what means the most to them and their family's legacy. And it becomes somewhat of a game because the rewards are clear, the activities are achievable, and we help them essentially create the system or game, if you will, that enables to them and their family to be fulfilled. And I think the best games, whether it's just a video game or it's a gamified service, the best ones provide people with a tremendous experience. Most people, not even most, all people, no, I don't believe that anyone buys items or acquires money just for the sake of that money or that item. I believe that the experience is what they want. It's the journey. It's the process. It helps you find and learn and enjoy and find fulfillment ultimately.
Or even feel something around it.
Yes, the feeling, I completely agree with you.
Nostalgia, it could be many things. Reminiscence of something. Sometimes just the object itself means something. Again, you could argue that it's because of the object. No, it's because of what the object makes you feel in that sense.
Exactly. So you asked about our superpower. I'm definitely not a superhero by any means. I'm just another guy trying to do positive things in the world. But I think the best thing that we do is help people have an experience around their lifestyle, because we want them to feel fulfilled. We want them to feel that whatever they have, you asked about stewardship. We want them to feel that they are being the best stewards they could possibly be of the gifts and skills that they have.
Sounds fantastic. And Bob, before we let you go, please let us know if there's any call to action, where we can find more about you, anything in that sort. And of course, if you want any final piece of advice or final words for the engagers, this is the right time.
Sure. Best place to get a hold of me, bobdepasquale.com or @bdepa on Instagram and Twitter. I'm pretty active there. I'm constantly providing ideas and thoughts around how to be a good steward of the things that you have and have a positive impact in the world. You can check out the podcast and blog, everything there. I mentioned initiateImpact.com. That's our company. And my final words for anyone out there who is thinking about the subjects that we've been talking today is, I always tell people this. I try to do this every day. I try to be grateful for the things that I have. And that really, really helps me identify what's the driving force. Like, why do I get up in the morning and do what I do? Why do I work where I work? And if I own a business and you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I gamify? How can I make what I do create an experience for people? I think the best way to do it is to identify what drives you most and just share that story, share your experience, and that will enable other people's to feel that, and they'll generate their own experience from your story. So just consider what means most to you and share your story out to the world.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much, Bob, for investing this time with us, with the engagers, for this conversation, providing your experience, your knowledge. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you here. I would like to know, how are you listening to this podcast? If you're doing so through anything different than our web, that is through a podcasting app on your phone, we'd like to know if you have followed or subscribed and rated this podcast. You haven't? Please go ahead and do so. That way we can reach more engagers like you to achieve our mission of making learning and even life perhaps amazing through games and gamification. You can have some simple instructions for some of those apps on professorgame.com/iTunes. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, do that subscribe, that follow using your favorite podcast app, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.